Yeah. Welcome back, everybody, to yet again another Purpose Served podcast episode. Man, last time we left off on a crazy one. A real crazy one. Last time we left off on talking about a free mindset versus a one that's enslaved and entrapped. And what got us there? Just to do a little recap, we was talking about being alone in a crowded room. And the meaning of that is, even though you're amongst a bunch of people, you still should be being yourself. And not only that, the spiritual essence of it was talking about the theme that's been going on these last previous podcasts of not being enslaved to the passions of the world. Ultimately speaking, we are trapped right now. And before I get into that, before we get real deep, if you guys are new to this podcast is simply about inspiring you guys to be the best version of yourselves that you could possibly be. Also to take practical means on the dreams and aspirations that you have. And over time, this meaning has changed for me. And now I'm getting more and more closer to the source of it all and the heart of it all. In order for you to act out what you want to do, you have to figure out who you are first. That's a never-ending thing. You learn something new every day about yourself if you really on that journey and you really on that path of improving yourself. But most of all, you should do that through the lens of living out the truth. Not your truth, but the truth. Perspective is real, perception is real, and you can develop a bird's eye view on life if you respect the two greatest commandments, something that we've been speaking on. And if you guys don't know what the two greatest commandments are, it's the love the Lord your God with everything that you have, and the second, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the one thing that I tell people who have a hard time understanding that, or kind of somewhat get it, is to ask, if you look around in your life right now, do you see people loving their neighbors as they love themselves? And they say no. It's like obvious that they're not doing that. And then I tell them, that could be a chance for you to be a beacon of light in the world around you, in the community around you. Have it start with you if you don't see that around. And that can create a sense of accountability. That can create a sense of self-initiative. And ultimately, people see that, whether they recognize it directly or indirectly, but they see it. Whether they acknowledge it or they don't acknowledge it, people can see it when you act off of those things. And that's true love. It's not fake emotional conditional love, but that's unconditional love. And we are in bondage to the passions. And what are the passions? Let's get back to it. Hold on now. I got a paper somewhere. Give me 1 second. Here we go. I got it right in front of me. So these are the passions: love of riches, desire for possessions, bodily pleasure that from which comes sexual passions, love of honor, which gives rise to envy, lust for power, arrogance and pride of position, craving to adorn oneself with luxurious clothes and vain ornaments, the itch for human glory which is a source of rancor and resentment and physical fear. And this is a quote from St. Isaac the Syrian, who we've been mentioning a lot on this podcast recently. But where these passions cease to be active, there the world is dead. Someone said of the saints that while alive, they were dead. For though living in the flesh, they did not live for the flesh. See for which of these passions you are alive, then you will know how far you are alive to the world and how far you are dead to it. So it's talking about the saints of old and saying that although they were living in the flesh, they did not live for it. They did not live for pleasure. They didn't live for the love of riches. They didn't desire for possessions. And the saints, especially in the context of what I'm talking about, is talking about asceticism. Practicing living in solitude and living with literally the bare minimum. The bare minimum. Just the clothes on your back and diet consisting of a little bit of bread and a little bit of water here and there. Sometimes you would hear these miraculous stories about these monks and they're eating once or twice in a week because of them, purifying their body in the sake to reach theosis, which is union with God. And ultimately, as a human race, that's what we should be striving for. And if we honor the two greatest commandments, we will get to that point to experience theosis. And it's going to be like that when it's all said and done, no matter what. That's where my personal end hope is. I don't believe that I'm going to see that in my lifetime at all. But I want to make sure the efforts in my life lead up to that. Somehow, some way, if I could push the needle. Now, that's a little side note. Just talking about the passions real quick. And that is what we are bound to right now as a society and as a culture. The list that I just ran off. We are bound to those things. And they create strong vices within us that we are bound to. Slave mindset. It is a slave mindset. So, for me personally, when I was decided that I wanted to play basketball, I was 14 years old. I was in the 8th grade, I believe. And around that time, I wanted to go to the NBA. That's who I thought I was. I thought I was a basketball player. Crazy work. And for the next 13 years of my life, this dream fueled me. It fueled a lot of my decision making. It fueled a lot of my emotions. And it caused a lot of deep-seated things, which it was a plus and a minus for me. The plus in it was it created a work ethic in me that was like of no other. It created in me attention to detail. It created in me the ability to see something through, no matter if it's going to work out or not. And the one thing for me, if you guys don't know, you're just now like new to this, is my journey with playing basketball was so rocky, it wasn't even funny. And it started off with me constantly getting cut from like my high school team and everything. Especially in high school, that was like my world, was to make my school team. And if that didn't happen, I was crushed. And it happened 3 out of the 4 years that I was in high school. And it didn't work out. And yet and still, I had holding on to a basketball dream of just simply playing at college. And that didn't work out. And I ultimately ended up dropping out of school altogether. I dropped out of school. It was over. And around the time that I dropped out of school, I picked up on some pretty crazy bad habits that was fueled by the passions. That was definitely fueled by the passions. And this led me to getting in trouble with the law. And that was my first kind of wake up call to where my life was at. But it's also, at the time, without me knowing, me identifying with being a basketball player, like as if that was who I was and not what I did. And I know a lot of young people go through that. I personally see it all the time right now as we speak, with me now being like a basketball trainer. But a lot of kids have the same idea of they got hoop dreams. And what a hoop dream is a kid hoping to get to the NBA. But in that, it creates a lot of problems. It truly creates a lot of problems, like dead serious. It creates false beliefs. It creates false narratives. It creates a false sense of identity, ultimately speaking. Because, like, for me personally, it did that for me. And I felt myself lying all the time about that to myself. And the one thing that I kept lying to myself about was, no matter what, I'm going to get to the NBA. I desperately wanted that so bad, and it wasn't a line for me. And this is not killing the dream of any kid out there that's going for it. Do what you got to do. But don't confuse what you're doing with who you are. That's huge. Because if you confuse what you're doing with who you are, that's going to create a mindset that's going to keep you on bondage from your true identity. And it's going to limit your existence. This is about to get deep. And the reason why I say that is because it blocks out God's will for your life from you willing what you want to do when we all know little to nothing. And it is best to take the humble route instead of the prideful one. Pride is head of all the vices, head of all of them. And the opposite of pride is humility, which is head over all the virtues. And we can become so prideful in what we do and what we think we know that it blinds us from seeing the truth of the matter that's at hand, which ultimately blinds us to being who we were destined to be and choosing a path that ultimately is going to create more destruction, and choosing a path that's going to create even more anxiety on top of the severe anxiety that you already have, or create more depression on top of the depression that you already have because you're trying to will things your way. If you align your spirit to the spirit of God, you are unstoppable. And the only reason why you are unstoppable is because the Creator is on your side. The Creator already knows your heart. The Creator already knows what you want. And the Creator already knows what you need. But do you know those things? A majority of people do not know these things. They don't know them. They really don't. And you have to free yourself from it all. You have to free yourself. And there's a transition period from going from being a slave to your passions and being a slave to what you want and what you are trying to do to being free. Free to move about through God's will. That's not restricting at all. In fact, it's the most powerful experience that you can possibly have. And it frees you from all the inner turmoil that you're experiencing. Because you wake up to the realization that you casted yourself in the outer darkness. And now you're coming towards the light. And that transition period from being a slave to being free is a purification period and a purification process. Now, we're about to get biblical. But Abraham, the father of many nations, Abraham took that call to faith in the unseen, which is strictly spiritual. Because what we can see is physical. But that's not where your real sight comes from. Your real sight, once your eyes are open up, comes from the realm of the heavenly bodies, comes from the spiritual world, where God's voiceless voice is, where God's names that you can't even utter is, and things that you can't even put into words. That's where it all is. And Abraham put his faith in that. And Abraham is known as a historical figure, the person that started monotheism, essentially speaking, because out of him came the birth of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And there was a specific situation in Abraham's life where he was old in age and his wife Sarah was old in age. And going from the land that they was dwelling in, Canaan, a famine hit. So they had to leave the land, right? They leave the land and they're traveling south. And they ended up going to Egypt. After he was just received a promise from God that many nations was going to come from him. That was going to pretty much like the amount of nations that was going to come from his seed was going to be of the sand as shore and the stars in heaven, the high and low, the earthly and the heavenly. And pay attention closely to what I'm saying. This is about to be a lot. All right. But the highs and the lows, the heavens and the earthly, right? And he travels down to Egypt from Canaan after he told him a promise that he was going to give his seed that's coming out there, and the generations after him, the land that he was dwelling in. He was a stranger traveling in a strange land. And this is what happened when he went to Egypt. And in between then, out of fear of his own life because of men, instead of putting his fear in God, his fear was misplaced. And he decided to tell Sarah a lie. And tell her that instead of saying, "You're my wife," say, "You're my sister," because if not, they might kill me. And that's exactly the plan that they went with when they arrived in Egypt. And they did this because of how beautiful Sarah was. And the princes of Pharaoh noticed this and everything, and they took Sarah and Abraham into their house. And not only that, Pharaoh gifted him with so much stuff, from animals to servants and all of that. But the servants is the one thing that I want to highlight here in this situation. Pay attention to that. after they got plagued, Pharaoh got plagued for taking Abraham's wife, and he had to receive a revelation from God saying that, how come you told me that this was your sister when it's really your wife? And he commanded him to leave. Abraham didn't tell him. So how did he realize this? It had to come from the Most High. So eventually, they left. And due to her old age and her really wanting a child, Sarah, out of her own will, instead of having faith in God, decided that Abraham should conceive with one of her maidservants, which was Hagar. And she did conceive with Abraham. And when this happened, Sarah was really jealous, and she treated Hagar terribly, to the point it was so bad that Hagar fled away from them and went into the wilderness. And she cried to God, and God heard her cry and reached up to heaven. And God said that she was going to have a son by the name of Ishmael. And he also told her to go back. So Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn son. But Ishmael wasn't the son of promise. It was going to come through Sarah, who was barren. And eventually, Sarah did end up having a son herself. God opened up her womb. And then we get the son of promise, who was Isaac. And once Isaac was born, it says in scripture that Ishmael mocked Isaac. And Hagar, for Isaac doing, Ishmael mocking Isaac, Sarah became upset and casted the slave woman and her son out, and it was back in the wilderness. And yet again, Hagar, was very grieved in her heart. So was Abraham over this. And God reminded her that Ishmael was going to be a great man, and nations was going to come from him. And we got 12 princes that came from Ishmael. And not only that, Ishmael was blessed as well because of the seed that he came from, which because of his father Abraham, So just to wrap all of that up, spiritually, symbolically, and literally speaking, you have a free woman and you have a woman that's in bondage. And St. Paul talks about this in Galatians, I believe, chapter 4 in the New Testament, about being in bondage because of the law and being free because of the grace given by the Son of God through his sacrifice that came from God. And that gift is free to accept for anybody and everybody. Literally anybody. There's no exclusion from that. And you have a choice between the two. Whether you want to be free or whether you want to be a slave. And we're going back yet again to the wilderness. They went to the wilderness. And the wilderness, as we speak on this podcast, is a place of barren land, but it's also the place to purify your soul and purify your spirit. Abraham had a dream that was dark and terrifying to him, when he was told by God that his lineage was going to go through 400 years of being in bondage themselves. He didn't know specifically that it was referring to Moses at the time, but that's who it was referring to. Now, Moses wasn't in bondage for 400 years, but the nation that came from Abraham was in bondage for 400 years. And this was the lineage of it all. I'm throwing a lot at y'all. I told y'all that this is going to be a lot. So, yeah, yet again, this might take a couple of re-listens for this to actually hit. And you can find all of this stuff in the beginning chapters of Genesis. And the story specifically that I'm talking about with Abraham, I believe is in Genesis chapter 12. In chapter 21, I believe. But going back to the story. Dude, the lineage of Abraham goes Abraham, and then Abraham had the son of promise, Isaac. He had many more like sons and kids, but I'm highlighting Ishmael, who's his firstborn, and Isaac, who's the son of promise. Those are his first two sons. And from Isaac, Isaac had twins, and that was Jacob and Esau. They were twins. Esau was older than Jacob. Esau was his dad's favorite, and Jacob was his mom's favorite, Rebecca. And these stories are so convoluted and so condensed and so complex, it's not even funny. But Jacob's favorite was his mom, Rebecca. Jacob stole Esau's birthright, and his blessing, he got his dad's blessing. That was meant for Esau, but he tricked his father because his father was old. And then after that, Jacob fled from his father and his brother and his mother, because once Esau asked for his birthright, he said it was already given to his brother. And Esau wanted to kill Jacob. So Jacob left. He ended up finding a wife. And I believe it was Rachel. Crazy. And I think he went to his mom's dad, his brother Laban, I believe, to find his wife. Wild, crazy stuff. And then from Jacob, he had his 12 sons. And from his 12 sons, one of his youngest, his second youngest, was Joseph. And they sold Joseph into slavery. The brothers sold Joseph into slavery because they hated this guy. They literally hated him. So as you can see, these commandments are being violated before the commandments was uttered. But it was something that at some point, it was in the hearts of the people to know that they was doing wrong. But they didn't love their neighbor. They didn't even love their own kin. And he threw him in a pit. And Ishmaelites found Joseph, and the Ishmaelites came obviously from the lineage of Ishmael. The paradox and the irony in that. And they sold them into Egypt. And Joseph went through a whole lot of crap. Started out and went in as a slave, turned prisoner, and his story ends the book of Genesis with him being the second in command. And him forgiving his brothers for what they've done. And seeing his father and everybody, because they had to come down to Egypt because, yet again, as the story goes, there was a famine, a great famine in the land, so they had to go to Egypt. Just as Abraham and Sarah did 3 or 4 generations back. Deep. Now this is when Abraham's dream comes into play of 400 years, right? 400 years go by from Joseph, and now enters Moses. The people are enslaved. They grew in number, and the pharaohs that was now in charge had no idea of these people, history of the land, and he did not care. He just knew they was this great in number, and he had to enslave them, or else they was going to end up probably taking things over. Who knows when your heart is evil and prideful and wicked and turned from God. And his was Moses ended up killing an Egyptian, and he, out of fear, fled to the wilderness. And in this wilderness, he is at the mountain of God. He's at Mount Sinai. And this is when you get the infamous burning bush, where he gets his true calling from God. And the cries of the people reached up to heaven. Similar to Hagar, who was a bondswoman from Egypt. Right? And he has to go back and free the people and bring them back to the mountain to worship and celebrate God, essentially speaking. And he does this. And what a tremendous difficult task. You know how hard it is to convince people that they can go free? They don't have to be in bondage no more. But when you've been taught the ways of the world, and your parents been taught the ways of this world, and your parents' been taught the ways of the world, it's so hard to get out of that. So that one person that comes through as a black sheep, you look at them like they're crazy. You look at them as they don't know what they're talking about, and you look at them as they're a danger to you in your current lifestyle. So Moses is fighting two battles at one given time. He was fighting the battle of the Egyptians, and he was fighting the battle of his own people, trying to convince both to leave. Pharaoh ended up letting them go after they went through 10 vicious plagues, and the 10th one ended up being the killing of all the firstborn of the living, including the cattle in Egypt, unless you put the blood of the lamb that was unblemished on the doorpost. And all of this stuff is very, very, very symbolic to the coming of Christ and Christ sacrificing himself as being a sacrificial, unblemished lamb. We're not going to get into all of that because we're 32 minutes in, and still a decent amount that I want to try to get through. So we're probably going to continue on soon in the very next podcast episode. But the people had to go into the wilderness in order to purify themselves from the slave mentality and the slave spirit that they had, because of the world entrapping them in the heaviness of them being a slave. And once they purify themselves, then they can make it into the promised land of Canaan, where they will ultimately be free. And the whole process of them going through the wilderness is to purify them so they can enter into the land unblemished, with no trace of the slave mindset in them. But obviously this did not work at all, and they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness because of their own doing, their own doubt, their own fear that wasn't in the right place. Their hearts wasn't ultimately in the right place. And those two greatest commandments sums up the 10 commandments that was given by Moses. And in Deuteronomy, I believe chapter 6, we see the greatest commandment that was given. And that's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your body, with everything that you have. Not a little bit, not some of it, and not majority, but with everything that you have. And then after that, you're supposed to act that out towards your neighbor. You're supposed to act that out towards your neighbor. And by doing that, that's essentially you serving your purpose. And it can't just stay locked in the ideal state. It can't just stay locked in a realm where it's just in your thoughts and it's just in your emotions. Because If you have to think that and you have to feel that means that you don't actually possess it. And that means that you have some ways to go to figuring out who you are in this world. And I'm going to bring up the quote yet again that was said by Isaac the Syrian. For though living in the flesh, they did not live for the flesh. A countless amount of people live for their flesh instead of just simply living in it. Another thing I'm going to bring up is the 3 degrees of knowledge. And that's of the body, that's of the soul, and that's of the spirit. In the body, we can equate this right now, symbolically speaking, of being Egypt. We can equate the soul right now of being in the wilderness. And we can equate the spirit with being the promised land, the land of Canaan. The land flowing with milk and honey. And the battle that all of us are experiencing is the battle between the body and the spirit, between what the enslavement is and what our freedom is, and where our freedom is at, where our bondage is at, and where our freedom is at. And in that in between is that wilderness, that barren land. Empty yourself completely in order for you to be filled up with the truth. Because you'll be surprised how much you lie to yourself. And you'll be surprised of how much of those lies and evil thoughts and evil feelings is fueling the hell that you're living in. It sure did that for me. And when I identified with basketball being who I was, like being a basketball player, it created so many other false identities that fueled so many other bad behaviors within me. And it was subtle until it became loud. Until I developed habits that I couldn't stop. Until I surrendered to the will of God. And slowly but surely the truth was being revealed to me. Once I did that. And going to another set of 3 is praxis, theoria, and theosis. Praxis is righteous activity. Putting what is right and what is truth in a practical practice. Like you're actually acting out virtues. And this can lead to divine vision where you're able to actually see and your eyes are able to open up through you trying to pierce into the Spirit of God and letting God see things for you. And once you perfect that, then you're going to experience theosis. And that's ultimate union with God. Very, very humble state. Extremely humble state. And that's where the promised land is at. Here and now. But in the ages to come, it will be in the New Jerusalem. Mount Zion. Where we get the city coming down from the sky. You know what I'm saying? And that is where you're going to receive true glory from God, from the work that you've done here in this body. But you have to give your body up to God completely. And making that ultimate sacrifice is the true definition of love, because that's what the Holy One did for us, is that he sacrificed everything for us, and he did it willingly. He gave his body up to darkness. And what happened is the uncreated light, it overpowers the darkness automatically. The darkness cannot overpower the light. It's impossible. So get out that darkness and turn towards God. That's what I beg you guys to do. But it ain't really up to me. You got a choice. Unless you want to keep experiencing this hell on earth and fueling it to make it worse, that's on you. But you have a choice. And by you serving your purpose and aligning your purpose to the will of God, you will naturally be honoring the two greatest commandments if you put it in the right context. You know what I'm saying? Y'all know what I'm saying. Stop playing with me. You know what I'm saying? But that's ultimately what I want for you guys, man. Seriously. Keep working on yourself. Keep getting better and better every single day. Free yourself. Enter in the desert. Enter the deserted land. Not only did those people do it for 40 years, that was in the wilderness, but Jesus himself did it for 40 days with no food and no water. Another biblical figure who spent 40 days and 40 nights communing with God was Moses in the wilderness. Another person that spent 40 days and 40 nights communing with God in the wilderness was Elijah, who faced off against 450 of the prophets of Baal, a demonic entity, and he went against them by himself like a savage. But all of this will be added onto you once you really seek the truth. Once you really seek righteousness and seek the kingdom of God, which I tell you guys all the time, you're not going to find it outside of yourself. You won't find it in other people. You won't find it in other places. The kingdom of God is truly within you. It really is. And pray with an open heart. Pray with a broken heart. Because that's what God wants you to bring to him in order for him to make your heart whole. I say ultimately speaking a lot, but ultimately speaking, you know, it's okay to come with that. And that's what's going to happen. And you have to be patient. And you have to let the greatest good work through you in that patience. When most people fold and they turn around and they don't let the good work finish until completion because of the enslavement to the body and being in bondage. You're in the process of becoming free. And for some people, it's shorter. And for other people, it takes decades. It could take a split second for other people, or another people, it would take a while. But no matter what, just sit in it. Sit in the pain. Sit in the discomfort. Sit in all that inner turmoil and fighting that you got going on within yourself. And don't confuse that with other people. Don't confuse that with other people making you feel that way. Like it's coming from somebody else. Don't. Take accountability. Take accountability. And you guys would be just fine. You really would. But you can experience heaven on earth right now as we speak if you let go and surrender your puny little will to God. Because we ultimately don't know anything. But we have a creator of this universe that knows all things and put all things in motion, because it is the mover of all movers and the creator of all creators. And we all are a little inclination and an emanation from that uncreated light. And his son is an example of how to get back to the ultimate destination, to the ultimate gate. And we want to be granted access to get through that gate. But in order to do that, you have to forgive everybody that wronged you. And you have to live out the truth to the best of your ability. and know that you could do nothing of yourself and there's no good in you whatsoever. That good comes from God. That's it. That is it. Until next time, folks. This one was a crazy one. This one was amazing. Yeah. Practice is coming soon. Yep. And we're going to keep the ball rolling. Another one in the books. Love y'all, man. I'm out. Last but not least.